Welcome back to Disturbing the Priest. I'm very excited for this episode because I am joined by the great Andy Dawson of the new wave of British heavy metal band Savage. Savage has some of those underrated material in the entire new wave of British heavy metal genre. And I'm excited to be joined by Andy. Andy, how's it going, man? How are you?
I'm really good, thanks. I'm really good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's a nice sunny day here in Boston.
Same here,
Um,
same in sunny Mansfield in Nottinghamshire, the home of
nice.
Robin Hood.
Wow, yeah, that is true, I guess. That's a
Oh
weird
yeah,
fun fact. Do you have like a
allegedly.
museum for them in your town or
Yeah,
something?
there's a castle and everything. Yeah, they're very proud. I mean, he's only mythical, isn't he? He's only like not even necessarily a real person, but Nottingham likes to make a big deal. So
It
wasn't
is
paid.
really rough when your town has so little that it
Yeah,
revolves
going for
around a
it.
mythical figure, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, Mansfield in particular, is sadly a town in decline, loss of the mining industry many years ago. So yeah, it's quite a difficult place um, to thrive, I suppose.
Well, I'd say the band's thriving because these two new singles I think are really great.
Oh, thank you.
Out now, Day of the Dead and Dead Man Walking. I've listened to them, I've enjoyed them, I've read a little bit about them, but can you give me like some background on both these
Sure.
songs?
I mean, they're not quite as new as we would like you to believe, as in they were recorded. We started recording them around or just before lockdown. um, a friend of ours who works for a big studio desk company called SSL invited us to do a session down in a place called Banbury, and we had the privilege to work with a guy called Mike Exeter, who's a producer who has worked with Sabbath and Priest and various people. He's big friends with Tony Iommi and various things. So he was part of this kind of weekend thing that we got involved in, and so he came. I used to be based at a studio locally before I kind of switched kind of jobs, or I suppose I'm gone freelance, semi retired. I don't know what you call it really, but I don't feel like retirement is a thing. But anyway, so he was at the studio. He came, he listened to us play through a few different things, and he was really into these two tracks. And then we kind of played through them, and he very kindly offered some insight because we've never, interestingly, never worked with a producer ever,
Yeah.
which is a shame, really, because I think there's a lot to be gained. What was interesting, I think, the dynamic of like having somebody outside the band having an opinion was actually quite useful because he's you respect him and his opinion, you kind of go, okay, let's try that. But if you're in the band saying, I'm not sure about this, let's do that, then you end up, can have quite bad arguments about it. Or somebody's trying to, dominate if it's their idea as well, then, often they want it to be a certain way. So that was quite unusual for us to have somebody that that is a name and respected. So that made a bit of a difference. So the two tracks we started recording, uh, as you've mentioned, Day of the Dead or Dia de los Muertos, as we like to call it, and Dead Man Walking were started around the whole COVID thing. So that was a bit difficult to get them finished, and then some time passed, and then we managed to kind of get in and do more work on them because we had a couple of days in the studio in Banbury, and we got the basic kind of drum tracks and some guitars and bass and things like that. But we ended up redoing guitars and bass. I think we kept the bass actually and did guitars because as a guitar player, you always think you can improve. So and then vocals, Chris did the vocals up in Mansfield in my studio, and and then of course it went very quiet. And Mark, the drummer, um, Mark's an incredibly talented guy. He's a brilliant drummer, but he's also quite a musician himself and sound engineer, mixer, producer. So after quite a lot of hanging about and, you know, undecidedness, he eventually, I ended up, I think, redoing some guitar solos. And it's a very, you know, it shouldn't take this long. It really shouldn't take this long, but it did. But in terms of the songs themselves, I mean, interestingly, Day of the Dead has a real, you know, Dio. I mean, literally has a Dio kind of reference in it,
Right.
which obviously we're all fans of Dio. And Chris was singing this part. I said, that's Dio. And he's like, no, it's not. He said, yeah, it really is. Oh, it's a little bit different. No, it's pretty much the same.
Was it the on and on
Yeah, yeah,
section?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so we kind of ended up, rather than running away from it, we thought, let's embrace it and, you know, let's make it a feature. Let's go, you know, hearts on sleeves and go, this is for Dio and this is for our thoughts about that. And rather than, you know, we could have like changed it or buried it or, you know, it just felt, let's do the opposite. Let's embrace it. So we kept it in, and it works really well in the piece. It feels like it should be there, but we didn't want to pretend like it was a coincidence or that you know, we were ripping anybody off. So, you know, I was really keen that we referenced it and we pointed at it and said, this is very much, you know, our take on that. Um, but it's probably for Savage, it's the most kind of epic track we've ever done. It's got a lot going on. There's a lot of kind of guitar layers. I used some bottleneck guitar, which I've never used before. And there's quite a lot, yeah, just quite a lot of levels and rhythms and things on, you know, kind of really fat. And then Mark did an incredible mix, and then eventually, after some time, we decided to get it mastered. Um, and it just sound, you know, I think it sounds phenomenal. Really pleased with it. And similarly, the other track um, was, you know, less epic, but similarly, you know, really happy with it. And again, when I was working on guitar parts, just trying to kind of put some extra levels and extra kind of layers and textures in there, which, you know, live you can't do, but studio is a studio. And sometimes it's nice to kind of treat it as such and, you know, add things in there that give it just that extra kind of, you know, texture. So yeah, really happy with them. And eventually we put them out, as you said. The response has been really great, you know, really lovely from whether it's people like yourselves or friends or people who know the band really well. Um, it's been really, really quite heartening. Sadly, Chris is been quite ill for some time, um, so that's been a bit of an issue because we've got all the material as well that we're kind of working on. In fact, doing tracking some guitars quite recently with Christian. Um, and you know, one's called Bad Seed and one's called 21st Century Psycho. Um, I'm not going to tell you who that's about.
I can connect the dots. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. So yeah, you know, we've got a load more stuff. The problem is just, you know, trying to get Chris in a healthy position to do his part. So we'll have to see. I see Chris quite a lot. You know, I go and see him. It's quite nice. When me and Chris first met, we were teenagers. Um, and what we used to do, like people still do and did, is get in a car, drive around, and listen to music. You know, from the days of like um, Chris used to have a little what it was called Datsun, which is, you know, Nissan car and a cassette player, and we would drive for hours listening to Live and Dangerous and Strangers in the Night and various things. And because Chris has been quite poorly, I thought, you know what, we should just do that again. So we've done a couple of kind of road trips of just like playing stuff really loud in the car. Um, and interestingly, the first trip we did, I don't know if you're aware, there's a new edition of Jailbreak and Johnny the Fox album. You know, and
Yeah,
there's like remixes, which are absolutely incredible, I think. So the very
I
first,
agree.
yeah, the very first trip, we just cranked that, you know, to. stupid levels in the car and just drove and you know and chatted and caught up and you know went for a coffee and stuff like that. And then we thought, oh, you know, slightly self-indulgent. We'll work through some of the Savage catalog as well, play that in the car because when we did that as teenagers, we didn't have that, you know, because we weren't quite there yet. So it's quite nice to reflect on some of the albums that we've done. Um, but we, you know, we share, me and Chris share similar, you know, very similar tastes musically. Some kind of pivotal albums, which, you know, Thin Lizzy, Live and Dangerous was a pivotal album for us. You know, I'd be like, I don't know, 15 when that came out. Um, and then we got into bands like Scorpions and then Van Halen 1 came out, and that was for me like quite an experience. I remember hearing it for the first time and kind of hating it because it was so different. It was so far away from what I was used to, and then you kind of get drawn in, and then you love it, you know. And myself and Chris both, particularly, I think the first maybe four Van Halen albums, um, and Scorpions and Saxon and all that stuff. So it was nice to get back in the car and just kind of be kids again and just drive around listening to very, very loud music on a stereo that's much better than the one that we we heard
Yeah.
back in the day. So that's kind of where we are. So we've got these two tracks out. We've got more material lined up, quite a lot. We could do an album. We definitely got an album's worth of material, but it's very much at the moment dependent on Chris's health. Um, and that's, you know, it's kind of, he's not getting any worse. He's not getting any better. You know, it's unfortunately it's a bit of a problem, and he's, you know, he's just trying to cope with it really. So we'll have to see, you know, whether we can get the new material done. Um, Obviously got the options of, you know, depping people in and stuff like that, but 'cause Chris has written, I think for most of the stuff that we're messing with, he's written lyrics and melodies and things like that for. So we've got all that, but
Awesome.
ideally we want Chris to do it. I think Chris's voice um, is kind of like, it's so recognizable, I think,
Yeah.
that, you know, and love it or hate it, if you hear it, you know it's Savage. And I think that's any, you know, bands that we all love, and it's either the voice or a guitar tone or whatever that you just instantly know as soon as it comes on who it is. And I think Chris has got that. We got a lot of shit back in the day, you know, from UK press, um, towards Chris. You know, oh, you should get a front man, you should do this, you should do that, get a more traditional heavy metal singer. And Chris's roots really vocally again are with Phil Lynott and Phil Mogg, who I think are just amazing. And also, I think Chris's lyrical approach, likes to tell stories and set up scenarios and things. If you listen to Day of the Dead, you know, as you know, which is a probably know, which is a Mexican festival that celebrates. You know, it's not as dark as it appears, but when Chris starts to write about that, he really digs deep into it to kind of understand. And we've got songs that have got, you know, like the album that we did an album called Sons of Malice, and it was very much around the whole kind of like, you know, banking crisis and monopolies and very wealthy individuals and families that control everything. So he goes deep into that. So he just doesn't sing about, I don't know, you know, motorbikes or demons and dragons or whatever. He tends to want to go to comment on things. So that you know that's really interesting. And we've got songs from over the different albums that that dig into some of those kind of issues, which I find, you know, um, I find interesting as I'm a songwriter as well. So yeah. Anyway, that was a very very long answer.
Well, I no, it's all good, man, and it's really, really great to hear all that because, well, that was it was a follow-up question was going to be, you know, if is this going to be connected to a later record, and that's exciting to hear all this news, and you know, 100% Chris. Like anytime I hear anything Savage, I'm like, oh, you know, it's so recognizable.
Yeah.
But I love these singles, and Seven I really loved too.
Oh, thank
So
you.
to get a follow up is really exciting because I love seeing how over the years how polished the songwriting gets.
Oh, thank you.
Um, and as much as I love Loose and Lethal, seeing the evolution is just really really awesome. And it's as a fan, it's just something I like to see in a band. And the experimental album I also enjoy
Yeah.
quite a
Oh,
lot.
I'm glad you
Extreme
brought that up.
Machines. It's heavy. I like it, and it has great riffs. It's something I enjoy quite a lot. There's a nice variety in the band's catalog.
Yeah.
And going back to Loose and Lethal, of course, I do have some questions about this record, and it got a second pressing, I believe, very recently.
There's
Um,
quite a few. There's a German company called High Roller that I think they're about to, I think, or just released.
just came out.
Yeah, and that's like, I think the second pressing of that. Um, I mean, there's been over the years, there's been, various albums come out that I've had, we've had no say or agreed to, which is frustrating. But High Roller have been great, in terms of communicating and coming to a financial arrangement that is fine. So yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing. I'm sure a lot of bands have that album. It can be a bit of a weight around the neck because everybody, that's the album. And
For
for me,
sure.
sonically, it's terrible sonically
Yeah.
because I mean, when it came out, there were some reviews that were like, oh, it sounds incredible, the guitar sound. And for me, as a guitar player, I'm like, oh my God, it's fucking awful. But, you can't argue with people. But yeah, for me, I would look, I wished we'd have gone and, at some point re-recorded it just sonically, just to get a polished, produced version. And I dare say a lot of people would have hated that because, people get attached to certain things. But yeah, it's a bit of a hard listen for me. I mean, I'm glad you brought up Extreme Machine because I really love that album because we were definitely pushing barriers and it certainly pissed a few people off,
I bet. Yeah.
because we were
Yep.
going for kind of more rhythmic, a lot of drop tuning, and again, vocally different. In fact, I've personally re-recorded a few tracks off there that just because, again, I love some of it, so I had the opportunity in the studio with a drummer, a friend of mine. And we were doing like, I suppose we were kind of experimenting with drum recording, and it's like, well, what shall we do? I said, well, how about we just knock out a few of these tracks? So about 4 or 5 Extreme Machine tracks. Whether they'll ever see the light of day, I don't know, but kind of reimagining them. But yeah, it's a strange. I mean, that album came out, I think, around the millennium, and yeah, it seemed to
Yeah,
upset.
2000, right?
Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
upset a few Savage fans because of it. I mean, there's a track on it called. It was a jam, really. What was it? Oh, crikey, I can't remember what it's called. But it's a long. It's just a long thing. There's no real structure to it. Oh, it'll come to me in a minute. But Chris said, I think he said to me the other day, actually, he said that's the worst thing we've ever recorded. And I said, I think it's great. As a guitar player, it felt like a real experiment, like a real stretch, because I had the basic riff and we just got in the room and just ran it and tried things and just didn't really think too much. And then Chris's vocals similarly were just kind of distorted and, random kind of things. And is it called something uncertainty? Oh God, it'll come to me. But
I'll,
anyway,
I'll have to give it a re-listen. New Messiah has to be like one of my favorites
oh brilliant, yeah, yeah. You
off that
see,
one.
that upset people because we used this. There was a documentary about Hitler, and
Yeah, yeah.
the
Uh-huh.
whole song is about these kind of cult people and the way they manipulate their populations. And again, we see that today. And so it was that, and then we found this documentary footage and just used some of that dialogue. Because again, we wanted to try different things, using sampled not vocals, but like narrative. But I think maybe some of our German fans just thought maybe we're glorifying it. I don't know. I don't really
Well,
know, but
yeah, well, it threw me off. I remember when I first heard it because the Hitler speech comes in.
yeah,
And I was like, oh, whoa. And then I
yeah,
looked
yeah,
into the lyrics. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. And then you get
yeah,
like
yeah,
the ending, which kind of talks about Mein Kampf and everything.
yeah,
Maybe if you send that song to some of the Kanye fans, they might really dig that.
yeah, yeah,
They
definitely.
might get the wrong idea.
Yeah,
I think
but
it's a great record. I
I
feel
think
like a
so.
lot
Yeah,
of the criticism I see is just like kind of it's bad because it's different.
yeah.
I
I
don't
think
know.
every band um, has the desire to stretch, and I think we're no different. And I'm sure there's lots of I'm sure there's successful bands who probably will go, we'd like to have a crack at this thing, but we daren't because the fans won't accept it. If you look at, Metallica's St. Anger album, which I actually like, apart from the snare drum, obviously, that kind of was the defining moment. But as a bunch of tracks, I love it. But a lot of people absolutely hated it, worst album ever. Uh, and they were just trying, a few different ideas, and it's still Metallica. But I mean, some of the Metallica stuff that I like, is when James Hetfield goes kind of like really low, and it's almost like got a country Americana vibe to it, But we all know that fans want, the same old, same old. So I think all these mega bands, all these huge bands, I think secretly would love to just kind of go left or right, from where they are, but the fans don't like it, and I'm a music fan as well, so. I'm kind of aware when I'm listening to my favorite bands, how I respond when bands slightly go off tangent and do something slightly unexpected. But as a musician, speaking purely as an artist, that's kind of what you do. I mean, I have spent most of my last couple of years as a songwriter not more than, but as well as a guitar player, and working with young artists and doing, what I think is really interesting work. But all I'm doing is collaborating and recording and mixing and producing. But it allows me to kind of experiment. I've used synths like guitar synths and all kinds of weird stuff to try and provide different vibes. And I've worked with people who are doing like real out and out pop stuff, or almost country esque things. So I've been able to do that, but in the in the dark, as it were. And I'm obviously not suggesting Savage would do a country album or anything like that. But as an artist, you want to stretch, you want to try out ideas. And the heavy metal audience is quite conservative. They know what they like, and I get that. And I'm so I go back and re-listen to you know like going back to the Thin Lizzy Jailbreak remix, which is absolutely brilliant. I think I've been listening to Warrior over and over
Nice.
again. Absolutely phenomenal. What a guitar solo, what a drum parts, in the middle. And so I get it. I'm a fan too. So I think, I think Savage, I don't think like the Loose and Lethal thing is obviously, I don't think we've ever gone back to it musically. Um, and maybe we would be more successful if we kind of replicated
Even
that.
with like hyperactive, you'd
Well,
say
Hyperactive was some of the Hyperactive material was written at the same time as so Stevie's Vengeance, Keep It on Ice were written in at the same time, and they kind of for whatever reason got put onto the next album. Um, but I think we were heavily, I think at the time, Def Leppard, a lot of American bands. Well, not I know Def Leppard aren't American, but that American style of big production was really big, and we should have ignored that. I think one of our issues is we didn't have we didn't have a really good well, we didn't have a producer or a really good manager. And I think if a manager would have said, look, just do what you do, t-shirts and jeans, heads down, get on with it, where you got, our media is, oh, well, you need to be more this and more that, and you need to look this, you need to have some kind of style, you need to have stage clothes, and so we were young, really young, and you just go shopping in London for like daft, crazy clothes, and you look at, I always think when you look at Ozzy Osbourne, what was the album, the second Jake Lee album? You've got the shoulder pad,
Oh, yeah.
the big
Jesus.
hair, and you know, it's just awful. But
Yeah, yeah.
that was, that was what was happening, and it was all pretty awful. That kind of like being pushed towards, especially Oz. I mean, Ozzy's not, he's not a beautiful man by any stretch. So
That he went blonde, I think.
yeah,
Right?
blonde,
Yeah.
back comb,
Yeah.
shoulder pads. I mean, I love
Uh-huh.
Jake Lee. I think he's an incredible. In fact, I bought this the other day, which is a Friedman Jake Lee
Oh, nice.
tube preamp pedal. Um, so yeah, we fell into that trap. Um, and yeah, my regret, if we'd had a really good manager who would have just said, look, think more AC/DC or Motorhead or whatever, don't dress up. Don't do that thing. But it was the UK press, particularly Kerrang magazine, who were they were quite brutal, with bands in the UK, and we're really kind of we, we had some really good press from them, and reviews and live reviews, things like that. But um, but then I remember being at I think it was a gig in London, and we had two or three of them there, and they were just openly criticizing, oh, you need to do this, you should get a front man. Chris is not right, blah blah blah, and just it's quite it's quite upsetting, when it's your work and you're bearing your soul and your everything you believe in, and you've got some journalist going, "Oh, that's a bit shit. You should do this instead." And then, of course, they change because the music scene changes, and then they go with that. So they follow. There's a kind of mentality of following what's
It's like trend, yeah,
yeah,
trendy,
yeah, yeah,
whatever's
and
trending.
I think heavy metal and hard rock at its best doesn't do that. It just does what it does. I mean, I mean, AC/DC was quite a big influence on us, I think. Um, and just that raw, I think their live album for me is just, If You Want Blood, it's just phenomenal, and everybody wants more of that. Essentially, I know again it is the conservative thing, but when grunge hit, and then everybody, remember I think Queensryche, trying to do an album that was kind of lo-fi and stuff like that. After having done things like Empire, which was phenomenal, and then trying to kind of do that. I understand it. I mean, a lot of those bands got washed away, didn't they, with the grunge thing? But now all the grunge bands are now just they're just heavy metal bands, aren't they?
Yeah, pretty much. Grunge kind of killed the thrash metal scene, or
Yeah,
and everything, like glam everything,
yeah,
I always saw new wave of British heavy metal as almost like proto thrash metal.
yeah,
Like it was right before, it was kind of the bridge,
yeah,
like it was faster, but there was just like this one element that just like was just needed to be there, that was just like super fast and super just like,
yeah,
shreddy and stuff.
yeah,
But yeah, it's, and Loose and Lethal obviously had a big influence on the genre thrash metal as a whole.
yeah,
And it's so funny hearing you say all this stuff because you're not alone. There's so many bands in your genre of NWOBHM that suffered the same fate,
yeah,
where no one gave them any fucking guidance. They're all just kids. They're
yeah.
whatever. If someone tells them this, they'll do it. They just, whatever. I guess this is supposed to be the thing. So let's just jump on it.
Absolutely.
Where if you're right, if you had a proper manager, a producer,
Yeah,
it's so crazy. Now, what I'd love to know about the Loose and Lethal record is you're right. When I first heard it, it definitely, I think it has some of the greatest riffs in the genre, period. And I've seen journalists say that it's like a top five new wave of British heavy metal album, period.
Yeah,
And that's something that people don't really contest with. And I think it deserves that spot 100%. But I do agree with you where there are times where it does sound like it was recorded with a toaster. It is it is a rough
yeah.
recording.
Well,
So
weirdly, it was the producer, well, the guy who recorded it, who ran the label. It was totally down to him, and I just think he didn't quite know what he was doing with desk EQ. So my guitar setup was exactly the same before that and after it, and for quite a few years. I used to use a Marshall 100-watt head, a Gibson Flying V, and I had a what's called a Boss DS1 distortion, which everybody was using at the time, and people like Steve Vai and Joe Satriani and Paul Gilbert and various people. So it was a really, we all wanted the kind of Brown, Eddie Van Halen, So that was my guitar sound. But you wouldn't believe it's the same sound. What ended up on the album because he was EQing the shit out of it, and when I listen to it, I notice there's some that are worse than others or less bad or whatever. But it's definitely an EQ thing, and it's just like I don't know what the hell he was thinking, because the guitar sound that we had in the room and live was banging. It was great. I mean, I've been chasing guitar tone all my life, and you go around in circles trying to get the same sound that you've already had in your head, really. And I'm still doing that now. Hence buying the Jakey Lee thing, but essentially it's still the same kind of Marshall, driven Marshall sound with a Gibson guitar. Boom, that's it.
which is kind of a lost art nowadays, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Like all these new metal records all kind of sound the same, I think.
yeah, yeah. And that's technology. I think technology is great in the sense that, you can replace drums, you can have all these kind of plugins, you can, guitar tones, but everybody ends up sounding the same, bizarrely, even though there's such a lot of choice. Everybody kind of sounds the same. And back in the day when, and before us, where bands were trying to develop a sound and trying to push an amp into distortion, and Eddie Van Halen came along and kind of like blew that wide open. And people to this day still trying to figure out his guitar sound from Van Halen 1, and we used this graphic EQ, and he used this um, device that changed the voltage so the amp drove harder and blah blah blah. All this kind of stuff. We're all chasing that, but now it's you can have anything, but weirdly it all sounds the same because there's so much distortion, and then the drums are so triggered. It it kind of like, I don't know, when you're trying to push towards something, you get some interesting. I believe sometimes by doing things wrong, you create new things. It's like learning. I read an interview with Paul Gilbert ages ago, and he said when he was trying to learn how to play guitar, he was doing it like listening to tapes and albums and trying to copy it and getting it wrong. But by getting it wrong, you devise new things or your own style or whatever. You can now go on YouTube and somebody will show you note for note how to play whatever. And I don't, there's nothing to be gained from that. If a kid at 8 years of age can play Eruption, so what? It's the fact that Eddie Van Halen created it is what makes it special, not the fact that it can be copied. So
Right.
we're in this age of technology and access to so much information that we can do anything, but it doesn't make for better music, I don't think. I think it's still, creativity, artistry, songwriting, wanting to tell a story is still kind of like really special if people can do that. And whether you're successful at it or not, it's like integrity, I think, matters to how you create your thing. But yeah, Loose and Lethal was recorded in a small house in a town or small city called Hull, which is a pretty grotty fishing. Well, it's Grimsby, which is next to Hull, so it's a port town. And yeah, we went and did that there, and it came out, and it did really well. So we can't really grumble. But Yeah, I've never been happy with the album sound at all. I appreciate what you said about the riffs. Um, I mean, I wrote the riff to like Let It Loose. I was 17. You know,
Jesus. Yeah, that's what I was curious about because I know the band formed when you were guys like you when you guys were so young,
yeah, I
and it
was.
seemed like you guys were always writing. So how much of that the material on that record was written like when you guys were like under 18?
A lot. I mean, I was 15 when I met Chris. Um, my brother was the original drummer, Simon, who's sadly not with us anymore. But my brother he came to my parents one day and said, "Oh, we're joining the band." I went, "What? We're joining?" He said, "Oh, we're joining the band. I've rung this guy up called Chris, and we're meeting up next week, and he wants the drummer." And I've said, "I'll only join the band if my brother can join." And I was 15. So that's kind of how I met Chris. And then we started learning covers, as you do. But very quickly, within, I don't know, months, a year, we started writing. And then, so yeah, I was 15, I'd be 17 when I came up with, and I'll be honest, I can tell you where Let It Loose comes from, where I ripped it from it in a sense, or not ripped, but inspired, which is kind of, some people have gone, oh yeah, I get that. But I was so wanting to, the intro to, is it Riff Raff on the live AC/DC album?
Yeah, that's
First,
yeah.
first track. So is Angus is
Oh, okay.
so that was me going, I want to do something like that. This chord just rings out. So that was the first thing. But then also when we started playing it as an up-tempo fast song, it was kind of like somewhere in my head between um, Van Halen and Motorhead. That's kind of where my head was at 17. So the intro was trying to do some kind of AC/DC thing, and then we were trying to, yeah, copy some fast Van Halen Motorhead thing. And that song to this day is kind of weird, to write something when you're 17 and people still asking you about it, and the whole kind of Metallica thing where they covered it. I wish they'd cover it now, you know.
Yeah.
That'd
I
be
know, right?
amazing. Well, they did. I mean, they did that. Is it Garage Inc. album?
Yeah, there's a rumor they're going to do a third one
Oh,
at
really?
some point. Yeah.
Have
So,
a word.
yeah, send a letter or
I mean,
something.
also not just because it would, I just love to hear what they would do with it now because it's a great track. And their bootleg version that they did is awful, right? It's absolutely awful. But
Somehow a worse recording
yeah,
of the
exactly. How
original.
did that happen? But I'm aware that there was this record shop in London called Shades that was, stocked all this new wave of British heavy metal and everything, and Lars Ulrich went in. And I think part of it, which was kind of astonishing, is I think the cover of Loose and Lethal was was also quite a thing that drove its sales because people seemed to love the cover.
Gary Sharp Young.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Gary became really good friends with Gary over many years. He's sadly gone. He moved to New Zealand and had a brain aneurysm about 10 years ago.
Amazing
But
artist though. Like
yeah,
just amazing.
and what happened was we were at the studio recording the album, and this guy Daryl, who ran the label, just said, "Oh, this guy Gary has sent me some artwork," and he did I don't know how many covers he sent over, bits of art, and we just got to choose it. So he didn't do it for us. He didn't do it for that album. We were just presented a number of pieces that he'd done, and we went that one uh, straight away, and it kind of made complete sense in terms of what we wanted.
Were there
Uh,
other ones you saw that made it onto other records?
yeah, I think there's a band called Chateau. I think their cover we were offered that. Um, I can't remember I definitely know Chateau was one that we were offered, but we chose. I mean, if they'd have seen the Loose and Lethal cover before we saw, you know, what I mean, they were
It's a
maybe,
great cover. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, just gone. Okay, well, we'll have that, but we got it first. But it wasn't commissioned. It was just randomly Gary sent it in to Daryl, and we got to have it, which was great. And then Hyperactive, he did it. You know, he did do it specifically for that, and he also did some. I think he did Holy Wars and possibly Babylon. I think he did all those designs. Um, yeah, lovely guy, Gary, and a complete fan. You know, he just loved his music. Um, but yeah, can't remember where we're going with that. But
Yeah, well, just talking about some of the art and stuff, and I'd love to go back to some of the recording because I'd love to know, talking to some of these bands, I'm always amazed by the amount of studio time they were given. I know bands that got like 24 hours to record their record.
yeah, yeah.
I'd love to know that. And if you don't mind, if you remember, you don't have to answer this, but the exact budget Ebony Records gave you for Loose and Lethal, if you remember
Well, he
that.
didn't because it was his own studio and his own label. It didn't cost him anything, you know. So it was like going to his house. So we didn't have to pay for it, but also we didn't get any money. So it was a kind of strange deal. Interestingly, when we moved on and left, I realised, thought actually it was a phenomenal deal because it was like a profit share. It was completely unorthodox at the time. And I'm sure Daryl wasn't being generous, but it was like, I think he'd just been naive, like we all were about the industry. So we didn't have any music lawyers to call upon. I think he went to a high street lawyer and just said, "Can you draw me up something and that looks like this?" So the deal, well, so we didn't get any budget for recording, but also we didn't have to pay it back, if you know what I mean. So when you get an advance to record, normally you then got to earn that money back through sales to then pay for that. So we didn't get a budget, but we didn't pay it back. And then the album contract was basically, I think it was like we got something like 40 or 45% of profits, which
Wow.
you'd kill for that now, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Or back in the day, if you could, once all costs are covered, and I honestly can't remember whether the recording time was part of that, but mostly it was manufacturing costs. So Daryl got the album manufactured himself, and then sell a batch, get some more manufactured, and obviously it started to sell really well. So then he paid us really well because that was the deal, you know. But we were thinking, oh, this is a terrible deal because it's not a proper contract and it's not a proper record company, and we don't necessarily. He was a bit of a odd guy, Daryl, difficult to read. Um, and then we did get a manager from London who, was a nice guy, but completely didn't know what he was doing. And we were like, oh, he's from London. Some guy goes, all right, lads, I really like to manage Spain, and you think you're fucking great. And we went, oh, he's from London. He must be good. So we went, yeah, okay. Didn't check him out or anything. And he was a friend actually of the guy that managed Merciful Fate. That was it. So the guy that managed
Okay.
Merciful Fate put him in touch with us because we ended up. I think we did a gig with Merciful Fate and we lent them. This is us, naive, lovely, kind people like that. We just let them take all our backline for a tour for
And
no
King Diamond
fee.
was a fan of you guys, right?
Say again?
King Diamond was a fan
I think so.
of you
I think so.
guys.
But we
I
lent them
think I heard that.
all our Marshall backline, and we did a gig with them at Hammersmith in London. And their manager, whose name I can't remember, Chris remembers his name, but I can't remember. But then he said, "Oh, I've got this friend called Andy who would love to manage a band," and we just went, "Okay." And then he got us out of the Ebony deal, and we got to sign with Zebra, and it wasn't great, and also it was a company that didn't really know. They didn't really know the market and didn't really know the scene at all. And they had Carl Sentence, Persian Risk, and Ian Gillan's guitar player, the Irish guy. He was on the late, so they were just dabbling really. They were a big indie label, and I think they thought, oh, we need to get in on the market. We better sign some rock bands. But it was a dumb thing. And then weirdly, after we left Ebony, Daryl got some kind of deal with RCA in America, and then Grim Reaper put their album out in America, and it was did really well. And we're going, fuck, should have been us if we'd have stayed put. That's kind of what we were told. We were told that RCA wanted us, but I don't know if that's true. But anyway, that was a massive like oh shit moment. So I don't think we ever recovered fully, and the band kind of we just I don't know we fell out, I suppose. I mean, Chris was married to my sister, so we were kind of family, but it all got, I think you run out of steam, and then we've kind of like we keep coming back every few years. We got back together in '95, which was great, and then we did three albums, the Early Wars, Babylon, and then Extreme Machine.
Yeah, the Neat
Neat record,
records.
yeah. So
Yeah.
Neat. That was Gary actually. Gary Sharp instigated that. He rang me up one day and convinced me that we should do it. We should do something. Because bear in mind, it was the '90s and most of everything had been obliterated. And he said, "Oh, it's still a demand." So anyway, he kind of instigated that. We got with Neat, did Holy Wars. That did quite well, and we played. We didn't play a huge amount, so it's been a sporadic stop start career, to say the least.
Yeah, tell me about it. Now, I know, you kind of did mention the band's breakup. I was curious if it was like if there was one major factor that broke up the band, but it sounds like it was just a mix of a bunch of different things
I
and
think,
missed opportunities and the music
yeah, I
industry
think
shifting.
so. I think at the time there was a split between Chris and the rest of the band. Definitely, there was some difficulty there, to say the least. Chris became increasingly difficult to work with. I think I'm sure he'd say the same about me, but it just got quite hard to get anything done. And then again, naivety is, oh, we can, the rest of us can just get with another singer and we can just, you know, carry on. And then Chris kind of did the same thing. Oh, I'll get another band and I'll call it something else and it'll be great. And Savage was the brand and the name and the kind of ID that everybody knew. And we started these other bands, and of course, they just didn't take off. And I would say Chris's band sounded more like Savage than I did. And I ended up bizarrely, even though we'd fallen out, I ended up going back and playing on his um, early demo. Um, I can't remember. I think he had a guitar player who left, and I went and did the demo, which was great, but it sounded more like Savage than anything else. And then some of that stuff actually made it onto the Holy Wars album. So that some of that stuff that I did with Chris's other band was so Savage like. It's like, well, it's crazy not to use this. So we used Holy Wars was a kind of putting together of. We had some old Savage stuff that never made it onto out. A 3-track demo that we did before we split up, and then Chris had a bunch of stuff that I'd worked on with him. I got some stuff, and if you listen to Holy Wars album, there's a few tracks that just don't sound like Savage, and they're mine. But, they're like
Yeah.
they're the stuff that I brought from my band that wasn't really a good fit. Whereas the stuff from Chris's band XL fitted perfectly. So, and then Babylon was one of my favorite albums because we kind of went back to basics and wrote again together and did everything from scratch. And I'm really happy with that album.
Yeah,
Uh,
a great record. What's that ratio for Holy Wars of stuff written fresh versus stuff brought over from different bands?
um, if I'm honest, there's only one brand new track on that, which
Oh,
is
really?
it's called How, which I wrote. Funny, I wrote that, but everything else is like there's three Savage demos from the 80s. So one called "This Means War," which I thought was brilliant, and I think we started playing that live. Streets of Fire. Oh no, there was a third track we didn't record called Ground Zero. That didn't get recorded. So there's two tracks from previous Savage, one new track, and then the other, however many there are, were just kind of brought in. Um, and that's why I enjoyed Babylon so much because it was like, oh, it's a band again. We're writing because I think it was just time. It was like we need to get an album together, and we just brought material. The stuff that we got, and then decided. Whereas Babylon was we got together and wrote the stuff from scratch. Um, and ever since everything we've ever done has been a proper band collaboration.
Yeah, Holy Wars up to Extreme Machine. Are those still owned by Sony?
I think so, yeah, which is really difficult because they were just like, somewhere in the catalog. And so Neat sold their catalog to what they call Iron Maiden's management or company, who then sold it to Universal. Um, and it's really frustrating because we can't get it. You can't get it. It's not out. We can't technically we can't put it out because we don't own the recordings. So unless we had a few copies, and we managed to find. I think we managed to find some CDs and stuff, but which we sold online, and they're all gone. So if you want an Extreme Machine, Babylon, or Holy Wars album, you've got to go on eBay or wherever and try and find a copy. And sometimes they're quite expensive, but it's really frustrating because you can't, we can't put it out. We can't release it because we don't own it.
Yeah, the only way I was able to listen to those records was YouTube,
Yeah,
actually, because I was curious why it was missing from like any streaming services or kind of just like
yeah,
because some bands will do that. They'll remove records if they're not proud of them or they don't like
yeah,
them.
yeah.
But I'm like, I don't know. I think they're like good records. I wonder why. Then I looked
I
into
think
it and
I'm
I'm like,
tempted.
oh, I see.
I'm
It's a
tempted
legal
to
thing.
put them out anyway and just go two fingers to Sony because if they come after us, great. Let's have a conversation,
I don't think they'll even recognize
realize.
it.
No,
They have
we
no
don't know they
fucking
have it.
clue how much shit they have. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think you're right. I think getting it out, um, yeah, just getting it out, even if it's not about, it's just about access for people. I just want people to access it. It's not about money. It's about, yeah, it needs to be out. It's part of the catalog, and people need to be able to get it. And it's quite frustrating when they can't, other than like YouTube. And sometimes the quality of the uploads on YouTube aren't,
Terrible.
aren't aren't great, are they? Or so, and it's kind of weird if people are monetizing it. I don't know if they are. If they're monetizing your material and you can't get
Yeah,
it.
there's ads on the songs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
So,
ridiculous. Yeah. I think it's a worthy thing. And if they do reach out, it's like, well, at least I got your attention now and we
yeah.
can actually have a conversation about this. Because
Well,
it's ridiculous.
I tell you what, as a result of our conversation, I'll make that my
All
plan.
right.
I'll get
I'm
all,
glad. I'm
yeah,
glad.
within a yeah months, because I've got distribution set up, so I can get it all out on all the platforms. I could do it tomorrow, you know what I mean? But it'll take me a little bit of time to get everything together. But yeah, I think I'm going to do it.
Well, I
Just
think it'd be cool to even like make a post about it on like socials to let the fans know as well.
yeah, 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 yeah,
Because that is just it's kind of lost media at this point,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah. And it's a shame. It's a
Yeah.
shame because that stuff needs to be out there, and people should at least be able to access it. Even if, let's say it's not, we're not going to probably. I mean, the whole streaming thing is another argument about the way the industry works, the lack of money.
Right.
But I don't really care about that as much as just getting. I think as an artist, you get to a point where you just want kind of validation. You just want your material to be available and people to like it. And if we just kind of went down the rabbit hole of like finance, we wouldn't do it. So I'm going to do that. That's my pledge and promise.
Well, I'm
That
honored to have influenced you in
yeah,
that
yeah,
sense.
absolutely.
Well, yeah, it's just unfortunate, man, because like it's Spotify and stuff, music really just exists now to sell merch.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
it. The vinyls, the shirts, the CDs, the underwear, it's just all exist from the music. And music, it's artists, it's like, okay, all everything I write now is just open to everybody for free practically.
yeah. It's a
Yeah,
real
it's like
shame.
bands just put their stuff on YouTube right away now. It's just it's people, it's the world we live in now, and it's really unfortunate, I think. I try to buy records any chance I get for new
Yeah, me
release.
too. Me too. And like we've got I've got quite a lot of vinyl. Um, so the deal we had with the Loose and Lethal reissue is that we got sent, I don't know, a bunch of vinyl. But when you try and sell it, like if somebody in the States wants to buy it, the shipping costs are just fucking stupid. It's like the album's 20 quid or $20, and it's the same again to ship it. So it's just crazy. So consequently, it's quite hard to shift. Whereas if we were gigging, if you were in the room and we were selling vinyl, we'd probably get rid of it a lot more quickly. But yeah, you're right. It's all about monetizing everything, except the music, which is the wrong way around.
It's quite a shame for sure.
Mm.
Well, and I do want to say you were talking about Loose and Lethal, and I think Live and Lethal is like just a great kind of, because we had that conversation about kind of re-recording stuff briefly,
Yeah,
but I feel like that's kind of the best case scenario where like we'll
yeah, I
just
think
play a
so. I
lot of the
think
hits and
we
stuff.
would we were doing like a hometown gig, um, and it was like there was a studio in the venue, so it was like this is the best opportunity we're going to get to literally hook up the stage to the studio and record a live set, and it was like this is our best shot at kind of getting Loose and Lethal out in a sonically something more pleasurable, than the original recording. So yeah, maybe that's as good as it can be. I think certainly it's unlikely with Chris's health that we'll be able to do that again. But yeah, it was, and a double, so a studio album and a live album in one package was quite ambitious, and took a lot of time and money to put together. So yeah, and the seven album again, I'm proud of. There's some great tracks on there. And when we kind of came back the last time with Sons of Malice, I also really love that album. Um, but yeah, it's kind of you live and die, don't you, by what you put out. So that's
Yeah,
good.
is Sons of Malice your favorite record? I might have read that somewhere.
Um,
Do you have a favorite Savage record?
I think I think Babylon is still for me. I mean, that's not. I don't think that's not the opinion of everybody else in the band, but for me, Babylon. I remember we finished Babylon in the studio, like the mix, and was loving it so much we just played it through again, like kids. Like I can't believe this sound. This is great. Let's just sit and listen to it again. That was great, and I think it was the last part of that. The kind of technology where you were nowadays. You record and everything is a file, and you're sending it to somebody, or they'll send you a mix back, and you kind of comment, and. Whereas Babylon was like we were in the room mixing it, and it sounded fabulous. And so maybe it's partly how it felt doing it as much as the album.
It's
I
like the
think,
community aspect of it, like having
yeah,
everyone there.
there's some like on there's some thunder on the album on track. Oh God, I don't know what the track's called. I should have all these the track. But we actually recorded the thunder. Like we were in the studio and there's a thunderstorm, and it's coming down with rain, and we literally just got quite an expensive microphone, stuck it out the window, and recorded this thunder.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and then we put it onto the album. So stuff like that, is really special. Um,
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I'll have to go back and find that song specifically
Yeah,
because it's
it's
hard. It's
called
always hard to remember
called
each.
it's called Rainmaker. So obviously appropriately, but
Yeah. Well,
that
yeah,
comes I think comes after
fitting.
Babylon, the title track, and then there's this it fades, and then the thunder kind of, and it sounds awesome, and it is you know literally recorded outside the studio, um, and then I think we used it at the end of the track as well, and you can hear the rain. So you can do that with samples and library stuff, but for me to know that we were in the studio and it was thundering and lightning and raining and recorded it, it feels really special. But I'd say Sons of Malice probably pretty close to being a favorite as well.
So
Um,
solid, so solid. I think some of the material on that, and even like these other records we've been talking about, like you can put some of those songs on Loose and Lethal, and they would fit in like
yeah,
perfectly in terms of quality. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
and I
It's just
think
really unfortunate that that record, even though it's a legendary debut,
yeah,
sometimes has over, I think, has
yeah.
overshadowed
Well,
these
exactly.
records.
If the sonic quality of Sons of Malice album, um, and that was Mark, our drummer, doing a lot of that work. Fantastic drummer, but also great sound mixer. You kind of go, oh God, what would Loose and Lethal like sound if it was recorded like that? Um, but I still think lots of fans would hate it. Go, oh, it's not the same. It's not the original, and you know how people are. But
Yeah, it's like at that point, it's like messing with people's nostalgia,
yeah,
and I've never like I get it, but I don't because it's like at the same time, it's not like the old one goes away, you know what I
no,
mean? But it'd
no,
be a cool thing to like compare it to and hear and be like, oh, I
yeah.
actually prefer this version way more, you know?
And we would be faithful. It's not like we're trying to rework it. It'd be a faithful, reproduction of those songs, but just sonically. I could really fall in love with the album again if sonically it sounded that good, but I can't. It's like a spiky old ex-girlfriend that you just can't spend any time with. So,
Yeah, yeah. A
but
hundred percent. Well, Andy, it's been great talking with you, man, and
all
I
right.
really appreciate you taking the time out again. Before we wrap things up, I just kind of want to give you the floor here. What's the general future of Savage look like?
Well, as I said, Chris's health problems are a barrier, but we're ploughing on with new material. We've even been asked to do a festival in 2026 in Sweden. So we're really, well, we're considering, well, more than considering taking that offer. And then if we do that, then that'll open the doors to other gigs and other festivals. So I think, yeah, it's time we brought the band kind of back into the spotlight. And some of the new material we're working on, I think, is really exciting. So, yeah, it never goes old. I mean, it's weird, you kind of think, is that the end of that? And then you just get excited again and you do something new. And a lot of established bands seem to avoid like recording new albums and new material, maybe because of a financial model. But for me, that's the whole point of being in a band is to keep recording, writing, putting stuff out whilst paying tribute to the stuff that you've already done. So yeah, I think we want to plow ahead. I think it's going to be crucial, really, what happens with Chris's health. If Chris isn't able to do it, it's my band as well. I've been here since I was a kid and invested so much time and effort into it that I feel like I owe it as well to kind of continue in some form or other. Got loads of material, and not stuff I'm constantly working on and new ideas. So it's like, well, Savage is the vehicle by which that needs to happen. I think. And I think that's a mistake we made in the past by trying to, we'll create like a new band, a new identity, and that just doesn't work. You've got to stick with what people know and give them something that they can kind of latch onto and celebrate. And I think the two singles we put out have kind of confirmed that really, that people do want it still, do like what we can offer, um, and it's still connected with the past. but it has a future as well.
And as a younger fan, 100%, man. And it's just really awesome to see how polished the songwriting has got and just like tight, controlled the
Yeah.
playing has become. And it's just really cool to see as a fan of the first record. Now, what's the best way for people to stay updated with
Well,
everything Savage?
we've got our website, which is savageband.com, and there's merch and things on there. And then we're on Facebook and Instagram. Um, the I think the website, you can contact the band via the website, go on the mailing list or whatever. So yeah, website, Facebook, Instagram. We've not made it onto TikTok yet.
That'll be the day. Yeah.
Yeah, you never know, maybe.
Wow.
And the future also includes putting out those three albums.
Yes. Yes. Very, very excited, man.
This
And
is the moment.
again,
Yeah.
this is the moment. It's been great talking to you again. Cannot wait to see the future of Savage. Really hoping for the best. These three records we were talking about and future festivals and dates. I would love to see you guys on Hell's Heroes.
Okay. Yeah. Is
I'm not
that
sure if you're familiar with it. It's a festival in Houston,
okay?
Texas. Tank played there recently.
Okay.
A
Wow.
lot of British new wave bands have been playing there, and I think you guys would fit in like very
Yeah. Yeah.
nicely. So just want to throw that out there into
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
into the
We'd
void
love
here
that.
to the
Uh,
listeners.
We've only ever played in the States once,
When
and
was
it was
that?
in 2000, um, South Jersey. Can't remember the name of the festival,
South
but
Jersey. Oh, it was a festival.
yeah, yeah, South Jersey. So just down from New York. So I think it was 2000 that we played there. That's the
Well,
only
I think
time
you're
we've
due to
been.
return
Yeah, I think we
for
do.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, awesome. Again, great talking to you, man. I'm
You
Brandon
too, man.
Battick, and this has been Disturbing the Priest.
It's death! I've just seen death!